Hi, in this video, we want to talk to people in government that want to establish and sustain an operational private sector working group model that will operate without you. We're going to show you a way that you can create a framework one time with the private sector, and a framework that will be operated and supported by the private sector, not you, but will work with you in emergency management and any other state agency, quite frankly, that is trying to address operational issues during any type of disaster. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? Well, we're going to show you how to do it. So first of all, my name's Tom Moran. I'm with the All Hazards Consortium. My background is in private sector. I came out of the communications industry, about 18-year career there, retired in 2003, and began working with several of my state customers in DC, Maryland, Virginia after 9/11 that were really trying to put something together with the private sector, because at that time everybody understood most of the critical infrastructure is owned or operated by the private sector. And government really had no say over what those, outside of regulation, about what those sectors were doing or how to leverage them, or it was really kind of all new ground. So the consortium since that time has been doing public-private partnership type of work since 2005 when it was originally formed. So we spent many hours doing it wrong, okay? And what is doing it wrong? If it doesn't sustain, it needs improvement. Maybe wrong is too strong a word. If it's not solving operational problems, it won't sustain. If it's government funded, it won't sustain. These are the things we've learned. We've seen the best programs in the country go dark if they're government funded. The money runs out and the whole thing gets disbanded without anybody trying to save it many times. It's unfortunate. So we've learned government can be part of the startup, but it has to be sustained, owned, and operated by the private sector. And that's hard for government to do sometimes because it's just a different language. So what we've learned, we learned from experience. We ran a number of public-private groups that were grant funded. Well, guess what happened? The grant ran out, and nobody's going to work for free, and it takes energy, muscle, planning, labor to organize meetings, send out the invites, keep the agendas, keep the notes, publish the minutes, and keep things going. And the other thing we've learned is if you're not solving problems, you're not going to stay together. No one will stay together if things aren't getting solved. The answer is not more information and more briefings. And I know when we ran out of gas, all of our meetings degraded down to, all right, let's bring in a speaker and have them tell us about a topic. Those things are fine, but that is not going to get it done with regards to a functional, operational work group that's solving problems. So here's what we did learn. I forget which, I think it was Hurricane Irene. After one of the big hurricanes in 2010, I think, the electric sector came to DHS, a gentleman named Jim Caverly. Jim ran the partnership group at DHS Infrastructure Protection, and they said to Jim, we've had enough. We got to solve the delays with regards to mutual aid movement. Many people don't know this, but the electric sector for many years, many decades actually, has been, they use a at-cost system of mutual assistance to trade people, parts, and things all over the country. And so trucks will move from around other states into an impacted state and backfill from other states. Very sophisticated, but very effective. But as these fleets move across the state lines in the United States and across the Canadian line from Canada into New England, sometimes it's faster to bring Canadian crews into New England than it is to bring them up from Virginia and North Carolina. They got all kinds of delays, regulatory delays, paperwork, delays at way stations, toll stations. It really was a problem, needed to be fixed, and DHS knew that at that time they can't fix that. Those are sovereign state policies that have to be fixed. So long story short, Jim contacted the All Hazards Consortium because we've been working with states operationally for many years, and Jim said, hey, can you guys help us pull this together? So the consortium organized a meeting. It was held in Philadelphia at the Amtrak facility. We brought in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and we were supposed to have a few sectors there. I think we had about 12 sectors. The room was full of private sector people. had a meeting. DHS brought in a facilitator named Bing West. Bing was a former military senior official, great facilitator. And we came down to, 10, 12, 15, whatever operational issues. And they ranged all over the place. But the big one was removing delays in fleet movement. So that became the battle cry. So DHS agreed to do some studies and interviews, and that took about a year. Well, that brought them into 2011, into late 2011, I should say. No, December 2011. It was obvious DHS had codified what people suspected, but it was actually validated that yes, the issues are state by state. They are regulatory and transportation and disaster paperwork. There are processes that need to be refined and updated. Some of the processes that were causing the delays were 70 years old and needed to be updated. There was a number of issues, and of course, because it's a regional issue, you got to go state by state by state. You can't do it as a blanket regional thing. Well, the planning continued through the spring of 2012, and the All Hands Consortium had a board meeting in July, and they invited senior officials from electric, food, fuel, communications to come together and look at this issue of how we can build a model that can sustain the planning so we're not dependent upon government resource all the time. It's not bad to have government resources, but you can't always depend on them. And the private sector agreed. As a matter of fact, the private sector voiced in that meeting that they're kind of leery of government-funded stuff because, as one of them said, you never know what's going to happen when the money runs out. So anyway, we had this board meeting. They agreed that they were going to start working problems and solving them. And the first one was holding an exercise together and looking at the process and so forth. Well, that was in July. Then came August, September, October, boom, Sandy. And Sandy forced everything to the surface that this small group had been working on for a little over a year. Well, during Sandy, because of the relationships that have been built, solutions surfaced very quickly. In one case, we had massive lines at toll stations. John Shaner, who was kind of the chair of this private sector group, contacted the consortium, who got in touch with New Jersey Toll Administration. They came up with a process literally in 10 minutes on the phone. Everybody agreed to it. We pushed that information out to the electric sector, and the process was very simple. Hey, if you're coming up on a toll station, use the far right lane where there's a person, okay? Organize your vehicles, leave a business card, we'll count the trucks, you guys move through and we'll bill you later, okay? And it eliminated the delays at toll stations in New Jersey, which was, if you've been to Jersey, a lot of toll stations there. But it was just getting the right people and a quick process redo, which didn't take long because the disaster compresses the time to make decisions. Things get done quickly or they don't get done at all. So that was one solution that came up. There was another housing solution, which the consortium worked with another nonprofit organization to find housing for workers and victims in New York City. There was, anyway, there were like 5 or 6 different things that they all did together because they had met together for the past year. Well, after Sandy was done, I get to the point, after Sandy was finished, private sector came back to the board of the consortium and said, listen, we'd like to start our own working group, but we want to operate it underneath you all, the consortium. And the reason for that is, number one, you're a 501c3. Okay, we don't want to start a new 501c3 and administer it. We got enough to do. We'd like to do it under you guys. We'll fund it. And we'll run it and operate it. We'll decide. We'll do a charter. We'll do the whole thing. And the consortium approved it. And that gave birth to the Multi-State Fleet Response Working Group. And right off the bat, that group was about 40 companies. And I was facilitating the process. And they went right through a wonderful process. The first thing they do is they needed governance. So they created a charter and with the states. And it was in that process that we learned you can't call the states members of this working group. The word member had too many sticky, fearful implications of what that word means. So we went to our legal people. We came up with a word for the states that they could be advisors and stakeholders. You know, they just couldn't be a member or a sponsor or things like that, but they could be advisors all day long. So they had this charter, and that was the first product that came out. Then they had a logo, which was pretty funny. They debated different logos. Then they had a website. Okay. Then they formed some working groups. They had a chair and co-chair. They had a steering committee. They made a list. I remember John Shaner produced a list on a spreadsheet, I think of about 30 different problems that were surfaced over the years within mutual aid movement. And it was lots of transportation issues, policy declarations, guidelines, where do we find state requirements for entry and exit. It was a lot. Well, that working group began to crowdsource. They picked one problem at a time, and they started working the issues. Well, today, fast forward now, they have basically addressed every operational issue on that spreadsheet. And there's either a product, a data set, training, or online videos that educate people to how to overcome problem 17. And that's when we learned the beauty of solving problems. What we learned when we solved problems, not brought in speakers, not only was the private sector engaged, but they brought their buddies. And not only that, having the states there with them, they got to build dialogue, and trust started to build, right? Trust. Well, the following year, we started doing joint exercises together. Fast forward several years, now those joint exercises, which were about 6 or 8 people in the very beginning, grew to about 20 to 25. Now they're hundreds. And it all came out of this trust framework, which gave birth then in 2015 to the SICE, the Sensitive Information Sharing Environment. And now that provides the official legal framework to support these private sector groups all over the country, if states want to start them. So why did I tell you that story? Knowing that story comes 3 important things. 1, government needs to be involved, but they don't need to run it and fund it. They need to support it. They need to say, hey guys, I know you guys want to solve that one, but it's too hard. Government is not going to be able to do that. That's going to take, this. It's a bridge too far. It's too difficult. Put that on the parking lot and let's get to a problem we can solve very quickly. So we learned government emergency managers need to be involved in the planning all year round, number 1. Number 2, you better show results fast. You better do something in 90 days, okay? That gets people excited that things are going, or you're going to lose them. And the minute we ran out of things to do, now we got into entertainment mode, and that's like bringing in guest speakers and topics. There's nothing wrong with that, but you can't live on that. You've always got to be looking for a problem to solve. It needs to be fairly simple, something you can show in results in 90 days. And those are the 3 criteria that we've now formalized as we take on new problems. 1, is it simple? Is it going to produce operational results, and can we show results in 90 days? Right? So, background. Now we have a model. We have now implemented this model in Pennsylvania. And that Pennsylvania group started in May of 2018. And today, July 2020, is well over 500 members. And we're providing the framework. The consortium helps with the facilitation. We work with the private sector to leverage multiple sources of funding, okay, to sustain the facilitation. Private sector's underwriting it, and they're starting to look at problems that are unique to a specific state. This group will meet once a week. They address problems, things that are easy and simple and quick, we put on the list. If they're not, they go in the parking lot. So the whole point to this first video is to help government understand, why is this model different? 1, it doesn't need to survive on government funding. Government can invest in the beginning to kind of spin it up, and then that's it. Then private sector's got to take it from there. Number 1. Number 2, it's got to connect to the state emergency management office. This is critical. We've just learned that when states have disasters, the emergency management director typically declares a declaration, and all the other state agencies align underneath the emergency management office. And you better be positioned with emergency managers or you're not going to get stuff done. We just know that from experience. And we plugged in everywhere over the years. We plugged in with police, we plugged in with transportation and health, and those are all good, don't get me wrong, but you better, at a minimum, you better be connecting emergency managers. So emergency managers have to be involved, number one. Two, government doesn't have to sustain this. Three, private sector has to lead it. So that is a process. That is part sales. Somebody's got to sell them on the benefit of being involved. That's the role of the consortium. We found states can't really do that comfortably or legally, but the consortium can do that. So we take on that role for the state. We organize them. We pitch them. We understand the value proposition. And when we started Endeavor, John Shaner came with me, the chair of the Fleet Response Working Group, and said, hey, if you guys organize in Pennsylvania, we'll give you access from the Fleet Response Working Group that's already developed 40-some products. You'll get all those as part of your belonging here. And that was it. Every single person, when we had a meeting at the governor's mansion, I'll get into this in the next video, and everybody raised their hand, yeah, we're in. So there is part marketing and outreach, okay? And then once that's done, now the private sector's got to own the facilitation. The state needs to be involved with them, but not as the primary role. And that's what makes it very hard for government, is to be the primary lead role in a private sector partnership is very difficult. It gets awkward, and there are just some things that need to be done that government just isn't comfortable doing, okay? We understand that, respectfully, we get it. So that's why there needs to be this body in the middle. In these cases, it's the consortium, but there's many other groups that can do this. And drive the mission towards operational results. And I can say this, it's bringing operational results has attracted more federal resource, private resource, people, information, partnerships. My goodness, the partnerships bring so much to the table. And the state's role can really focus on supporting the use cases that they can support. But you don't have government bitch. You don't have government being bitched at by private sector. Hey, this sucks, that sucks. We don't tolerate that stuff. Not in the Endeavor model. Not in the Fleet Work Group model, right? So they called Pennsylvania's work group the Endeavor Work Group, and so now they're going to brand that word Endeavor as they take the Endeavor model, which is the multi-state fleet response working group model down at the state level. They call it Endeavor. So it'll be Endeavor Pennsylvania, Endeavor Delaware, Endeavor Maryland, Endeavor whatever states want to do it. So in the next videos, we'll get into kind of how it came about. But the big idea here is this is a model that doesn't require you in government to sustain it. It doesn't even require you to lead it. And that's a little awkward for some states. They'll play a leadership role, believe me, right? But it doesn't require you to own the responsibility to be the convener and the note taker and the agenda pusher. It doesn't require any of that. That's the role of the consortium and eventually the private sector. We take it on at first, and then the private sector, once they understand the model, hey, this is their model. This isn't the government's model. This is their model, and government's going to support them. Once that shift goes on in their mind, then they go, okay, that's fine. And again, it's all about solving problems. It's all about problem solving. And using the criteria I told about: simple, operational benefit, show results in 90 days. Using that model, you can stay focused on things that are solvable, and then take, complex issues and put them on the parking lot, because there's always complex issues that come up. Credentialing, always an issue, always brought up by the private sector, and they just don't understand how complicated that is for government to solve. It's just hard. In some urban areas they've done it, but statewide, very difficult. But it always seems to come up. So these issues like EMP, right, electromagnetic pulse, these are macro issues. It's not really going to be solved at an operational level with the states. That's really a federal issue. Cyber issues always come up. And within Endeavor, they're not going to look at the cyber issue left of boom, like pre-attack. They're looking at post-attack coordination. So much more operationally relevant for a state and getting public and private to work together. So there's a number of use cases that are going on there. So within this model, you can address things that are disaster response related use cases, civil unrest, data, information sharing, cyber operational related issues, We got a number, there's like 80 use cases, I think, right now that the Fleet Response Working Group is working on. Endeavor's got their own 15. But using the Endeavor model, it helps private sector understand, this is their show, not government's. Government might start it, because we have to start with government. I'll tell you the story in the next video, how it started. But this model is designed for one thing: sustaining elections in government, sustainment, retirement in government, retirement in private sector. You've got to build a framework that can survive the disruptions of government funding, government elections, so forth, as well as private sector turnover. You need it to be lightweight. It doesn't need to be a massively expensive operation. I think the Fleet Working Group was doing weekly, quarterly, monthly, and annual meetings with an annual report and producing product left and right. The whole budget for the whole year was under $100,000. Okay? And that was a team of about 5 people. So do the math. It's pretty cheap. Not to mention the many hours the private sector put in, because they were pumped because we were solving problems. And they didn't get paid for that. So the Endeavor model, when it's up and running, there's like phase 1, 2, and 3. I just gave you phase 3. The Endeavor model works, and we're talking to multiple states right now about that, and kind of we'll get into that in the subsequent video. But I wanted to make sure this first video you got the background, the story about how it came about, what it does, what it doesn't do. And the next video we'll talk about the next step is this, how it got set up and what do you do to set it up. And the third, we'll talk about some of the problems and the use cases that get addressed.